Squatters in New York is the 16th chapter of the book by North that examines and kind of traces squatters from all around the world. And it kind of deals with squatters, especially in New York in the mid-1800s. This is present-day New York. It's a hustling, bustling, real estate city. Almost every part of the city is planned and developed. And the city and the people have a very decided feel to it. But it wasn't always like this. This was the scene, or often seen, in New York. It's a shanty town, and it's inhabited by squatters. In the mid-1800s, parts of Brooklyn and Manhattan were largely uninhabited and underdeveloped. It was marshland and bluffs and things of that nature. Poor opportunists, often immigrants, usually German or Irish, took advantage of this free land owned by the city. Newark sees the squatter as an admirable improviser who took advantage of an opportunity and asserted his natural rights, as he was stating earlier. He says that the squatters were people whose communities defied the rigor of square blocks, whose dwellings rolled the landscape rather than flattened it. They were people who dared to dream of a home. And he's talking about how a lot of times when we develop places that we have a tendency to like just change the landscape entirely. Shanties don't do this. He says that the shanty is the most wonderful instance of perfect adaptations and a means to an end in the whole range of modern architecture. It says nothing is prepared for it, neither ground nor material. Its builders have but an empirical knowledge of the craft that they practice. And this is really true. Builders of shanties grab cans, boards, anything that they can find and to make their places. In New York, squatters were often immigrants, as I said, and usually German or Irish. There was one colony of squatters called Crow Hill that were black people. But other than that, it was usually German and Irish. They were very poor. They can't afford rents or tenements to buy houses. And they take advantage of marshland, swamps, and things like that to make their houses. The shacks that they build are innovative. Sometimes the roofs are made of like flattened out tin cans that are attached together. And people will boil the tin cans to get the metal off to make hinges for the doors and things like that. Some shacks even actually floated in water and were like permanent ships, and they were able to move back and forth with the tide. A lot of the shacks were also movable and could be moved in case of a natural disaster. Eventually, the shacks congregated around each other, and towns began to form. They were given names that had something to do with the town itself. This is a picture of Tinkerville that was taken in like 1870, and Tinkerville was named because there were a lot of smiths that worked there. Shanty towns oftentimes developed all the social structures that you would find in a regular city, such as churches, thriving economies, things like that. The economies usually consisted of recreational places like pubs, taverns, bars, and saloons. Also, squatters oftentimes had jobs. They were, movers. They were laborers. They also kept livestock because the land was undeveloped. They were allowed to keep animals and pigs like that, and they sold animals and animal byproducts. Other than that, they usually worked in service industries, which is really common for immigrants of the time. They worked for railroads, they worked for factories, and a vast majority of them were movers. At the time, it was cheaper to move an entire house than it was to actually build a new house or to take things out of the house and then put it in another house. So they would break down the house and move it to another place. And this is where squatters in New York got a lot of their ingenuity to build homes. Eventually, New York began to expand and try to take advantage of some of the land that wasn't being used by the city, but was being occupied by the squatters. And the investors were trying to tear down the shacks and things like that. But at the time, squatters had a lot of tools in their tool bag to keep people from crushing their houses with bulldozers. One of these tools was the legal process called adverse possession. An adverse possession is a law in the United States that says if you live in a place long enough and the rightful owner doesn't make a claim, a legal claim on the place in a certain amount of time, that possession of that place and the rights to that place transfer to you, depending on how long you live there. Another tool that squatters had was the ballot. Even though squatters didn't have a legal place of residence, they were still citizens. And because of the mass numbers of people, there were 10,000 squatters in Slab City, it was almost impossible to win a local election without support from the squatters, from the people that were living illegally. So if you couldn't mobilize them, then you couldn't win. And because you had their support, then a lot of times you took care of them. This became so prevalent, the use of squatters, the scene of squatters in New York, that it began to be acknowledged by the New York Times and different newspapers. And there was even a Broadway play called Squatter Sovereignty that ran for 5 months on Broadway, which was a long time for the area. Eventually, people, the investors wanted to take their land back. So what they did was they tried to put out a negative image of the squatters, that they were heathens, that they were criminals, that they were thieves, and things like that. But this was far from the truth. Squatters, like he said before, were usually the most law-abiding citizens. Investors in the government also stated that the squatter inhabitants were filthy and that they had poor sanitation habits. But this was also untrue. In fact, for a lot of the outbreaks, the majority of the deaths and the sicknesses occurred in tenements that were owned by landlords that the squatters would be living in if they didn't have their own homes, and that they would have to move to if they were kicked out of their homes. However, by the 1900s, the investors finally gained the upper hand, and the squatters were being ejected like quickly. And what was once rugged land and shacks and things was turned into this, and this is what we consider when we think of the 1900s New York. It eventually evolved into the New York that we know today. Today, there are almost no squatters in New York. However, there are 12 apartment buildings that are full of squatters that, after the 1900 mass ejection, they came and they took that tenement buildings that were left during the Great Depression. And out of those 12, 11 of them have worked out rent agreements where they pay really low rents, but one of them, and it's the only building in New York that has no rent, is still rent free. And all the squatters in that entire tenement building pay no rent at all. And it's nice that there's still a place like that in New York. The questions that I have for the class are, how would the experience of somebody walking in New York City with the presence of squatters and shanty towns be different from that of someone walking in the present New York City? And my second question is, today, New York City is known as a very fast-paced, make-or-breaky city. There's a decided feel to the place that is different from anywhere else in the world. How would this be different if shanty towns were still common, that's typo, or had lasted past 1900? In short, how do you think that the mass ejections of squatters in the 1900s affected the soul of New York City?